Okay, so I think we're wrapping this stuff up. And we were just talking a little bit more about, hey, when you're developing your marketing materials, obviously, first make sure you understand your unique selling proposition. But you want to use that USP in a lot of things, right? Obviously, one is your testimonials, right? Make sure people, when they give you a testimonial or referral, you make sure that they stress those things because that's what motivates people. If you're doing advertising, put it in your advertising. We didn't mention this earlier. I don't think we did. But like with referrals, in that Kennedy book I mentioned earlier, they say, look, for people who are really advocates, create binders and make it easy for them to share that information, and of course you control putting together the packet, the binder with some information or a DVD with a video. You control that, but you give it to them and let them easily share that with other people.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's a great,
you've got to reduce the friction. You've got to make it
right.
easy for people to interact with you and easy for them to share. People are time poor and they're not going to do it. If you want to create advocates and people who are going to be evangelists for your company, you need to create assets, marketing material, messaging that lets it, and also ask and listen. So ask them for a testimonial and see if they can also share it. Even ask them if they have anyone who might like to, use your service. So don't be afraid to ask. It's important because if you don't, the old adage, if you don't ask, you won't get, right? But you obviously have to do it in a polite and timely way. But don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, one example of that, actually two examples in I think it was in that Kennedy testimonials book, is they talk about if you're offering a physical thing that's geography tied, right, and you have a client on a street, you can outline the 5 houses around them and say, or even the whole neighbor, the street, and say, hey, Bob, I have the addresses of the people around you. I would like to send them a letter from you. I'm going to do all the work, but it's coming from you because that's who the reply is going to be, right? It's literally coming from you. And I'm going to write it. I'm going to do the mailing. Everything. You're going to sign off on it, right? But this mailing is coming from you, and you're going to talk about how you had your plumbing incident. That's a real thing, right? You had your plumbing incident, and it was broken in the middle of the night, and I came out and fixed it, right? And get him to sign off on it, but you do all the work. I'm like, oh, that's freaking brilliant.
Yeah, for any kind of business which is location-based like that, you absolutely need to either pre-sell or back-sell after you visit or before you visit, because of that. That's you've got your ad sitting there in the street, right? People can relate to their environment much more easily than something abstract.
Yeah. The other one, and I think I forgot to mention this earlier, was the absolute best time to ask for like this referral or reference type thing is that time where basically you've finished helping them and they go, wow, thank you so much. Like that is when you have to be, you can't think about it. Well, hey, you know what? I should ask them for a referral later and let me put together some stuff. No, you have all your stuff done, right? And you say, by the way, I see you are really happy with this. Would you mind doing me a favor? And, doing
We
this.
do exactly that in my wife's business. So she has a business which when people are successful with what we do, they are extremely happy. I wouldn't say it's quite life-changing, but it's transformational.
Yeah.
And at that point, they want to tell, they actually want to tell people.
Yeah.
And so we position our message to say, please, we're thrilled for you. That's really exciting. Will you, tell the world effectively through giving us a review? And at that point, there is a outpouring of love for our company. And it's a very powerful advocacy that we make sure we leverage. But as you say, at exactly the right time, at the point of maximum happiness for them, is when we slip the piece of paper to them and say, can you tell the rest of the world how happy you are? And they gladly do that almost always.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other one, which this is where you can go both ways, right? But you can either say, would you do this for me? And would you reach out, right? And you can have, like I said, the brochures, or you can say, do you know of people who might need this, but you give me the lead and then I go work it, right? And it's like there you have control. Once you get that lead, you have control. Otherwise you're hoping at some point, they do it.
I think one of the how I would summarize this is that you've demonstrated value. So if it's a service or a product you've provided, after they've used it, they've engaged with your company, they bought the product, used the service, you've demonstrated you're giving them value. So then you do the ask of, will you tell others how wonderful we are?
Yeah.
And the alternative way that this happens in this lead generation is that you do it, and this is quite common with digital type businesses, that you give people value before they purchase something. And that's just
Oh,
in
absolutely.
a more pure sense of getting the lead. So maybe
Right.
a practical example would be a calculator. Someone might come to a website, mortgage companies do this. So they enter a
Yep.
mortgage calculator, they add value by giving you a quote or letting you calculate mortgage repayments, giving you some perhaps competitive information. They've given you value, and in return for that value exchange, they want to have your details.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's an
absolutely.
alternative way. That obviously is not related directly to a testimonial, but that's the alternative kind of lead generation approach.
Yeah, no, let's get into that, because I love the whole, that's Dan Kenny's magnetic marketing approach, is create a lead gen thing that it does a couple things. And one is it gets people to self-identify, right? Because they're
Yeah.
like, oh, hey, I'm looking for this, and here's something that, again, like you said, it's free, right? For an exchange of usually contact information is how it's often done. They will come here and they'll get this, pamphlet, the 7 things you need to understand before you hire your general contractor, right? So you have a document that really gives away free value. It's not just you selling your shit, right? That's the hardest thing I have when I'm talking to clients. Like, oh, I'll put together showing all the stuff I sell. I'm like, no, that's not what this is, right? It's got to be truly a value that they're going to go, wow, okay, this was great. Because also it becomes viral, right? They'll share it, they make it stuff, it's great. But they give you their contact info. And then you can, of course, add them to like a drip campaign, or in some way keep reaching out to them. That was the other one of the biggest things I hear in Kennedy and other speakers is the lack of follow through. Is his example, one of them was he goes out to a nice restaurant, a lot. He likes to dine out, and he's like, maybe out of a dozen times, maybe one company will try to collect his info when he's out, to say, hey, what's your name? Get the contact info. He's like, maybe they'll do that. And then if he's lucky, like if, out of that, only a small subset will ever actually reach out to him. And if they do, they're not doing any sort of like data appending or understanding the value of how much, like how often he eats out and how much money he, spends. They do it to everybody, right? They're just mass doing it, which not that it's wrong, but it's just, you probably want to treat people of different value differently, right?
Right, that's a really important insight. So there's a few comments there to unpack that you're talking about, Joe. I think the first one is that you said, which we've discussed several times in this video series, about people self-identifying. One of the key things that we recognize as small business owners is that we need to make sure that we're maximizing the return on our investment.
Yeah.
And when prospects self-identify, it's fantastic for us because
Right.
we're reducing the cost of us having to engage people because they put their hand up themselves to identify. The second point that you made, which I think is a hugely valuable one we haven't touched on, is the idea of segmentation. So the idea that it's fantastic. I mean, the nirvana here would be that someone comes to us, puts their hand up and says, we're interested in my product or service. And the second component is they identify the type of product and service or the type of audience member they are.
Right.
So we can segment them to go, oh, they are a Lexus buyer, or oh no, they're a Toyota, buyer, or they're a SUV, whatever it is. Maybe it's a bad example, but they identify kind of their capacity to buy our service, potentially how soon they might buy our service, some way to qualify them in terms of how much attention to pay them, and also to try and quantify their commercial value and whether it's something that may happen in the near term or it's longer term.
Yeah.
For example.
Let me further. So this is out of Kennedy, and I've read almost all that. I have all of his stuff. I think I just haven't read them all yet. I'm close. This one is my favorite book. Gives amazing, fun, really small business can do. So many of these examples. One example, which he talks about, is the whole goldfish bowl, business card drop-in. And he's like, look, you can, everyone, you see them everywhere, right? Drop in your business card, win a lunch, right? At like a restaurant. So he's like, hey, first off, when you get those out, look at them and hey, you know what? If you see the person like is, a certain job title type thing, like they're the administrator of something, and they are the ones that decide on, they work at a large company, you might want to target them with some mailers about bringing, for what's it called, catering type things, right? So yeah, everyone gets entered into the drawing, but hey, these guys, or maybe it's someone else that complements your business that you might do some co-stuff with them. Like one example is I think they talked about with like Home Depot. They would go in and say, I want to give every one of your employees a $2 or a free lunch, right? Because they live so, but it's things you can do together. But you don't, again, to your point, you segment, you treat them differently, right? You don't just do slam bam and that's it. It's just amazing what you can, a little bit of work, and you're like, wow, there's so much more I can do with this. You could take all the phone numbers, you can, if you map them and start looking at where you're pulling from and targeting them with text message if you want, or to do different stuff for them.
The other thing which might be useful just to quickly touch on is that I would characterize it as two different types of lead generation in this sense. There's what I might call active and passive. So active is, as Joe's saying, that you get some tangible information, an exchange of information for an exchange of value, and you get some knowledge about an individual. So you can segment them, you can understand who they are. The passive method often doesn't involve a physical, tangible, or at least acknowledged transfer of information. It's when, for example, someone may engage with some of your content online, you can track that individual and you can send messaging back to that individual. So this is not where they are surrendering information about themselves, their name, their location, their income level, or whatever. But it's a way of essentially building a list, or not a physical list of names, but building a connection with these people. So you can do something called remarketing or retargeting, where you can advertise back to those people. The benefit of that is that rather than advertise to 100,000 people, you are focusing only on people who've already engaged with your content. So the return on investment is typically higher.
Yeah. For example, I have a site, theautomator.com. I have a Facebook pixel that I have installed via WordPress. This was all, anybody could figure this out, right? I install it on my site. I can tell people that come to my site, and I could easily retarget them if I wanted to, like in a Facebook or elsewhere, right? But because it's used in a lot of places, but I could target them with ads if I want to sell like my Udemy course or something, right? And more specifically, let's say I could tell they went to my regular expression pages versus the web scraping, right? I might send them a whole different message of, I saw you looked at this. Did you realize I have a web scraping course on whatever, right? Or see these other videos.
To give another practical example, let's imagine that it's the exact same thing as someone walks into your shop, your store, and spends 10 minutes there. It's a bookshop, and they're browsing the military history section. And then they walk out, and at the moment, you can never talk to those people again. You don't know who they are. You don't have their information. You can't communicate to them. They've left. You've lost them. They're gone. But with this idea of remarketing and retargeting, you know that they were in the store. You know how long they were there for. You know their age group. You know their geographic location. And you know what they were interested in.
Well, I was going to say, which aisle they were in,
Yeah, which aisle. So in context, you could then advertise a message about a military history book back to them. And this is what this basically means online. So if people are visiting your website, piece of content, it's possible to retarget them. So in some ways, you've already attracted them to your website, maybe through some other mechanism. But then you can remarket, you can advertise to only that group of people again, and that can help move them closer to a sale because they already know, they've got some relationship with you already.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to bring up, and I have the note here, but it's equally important, and I loved in Kennedy's book on, I think it was The Ruthless Management of People and Profits. I actually put off reading that book for quite a while because I'm not a big number. It's ironic because my background is in statistics, but I get bored with numbers, reading stuff. Yet it was an amazing book. But one of the things they talked about it when he was hiring people, he realized when he's creating an ad to hire people, early on, he was trying to make it easy for people to apply. And then you get all these unqualified people trying to apply, and then they're jumping. You're doing all this. You're interviewing. You're calling. It's all this work. He realized the ad, which is also your lead gen type tool, it should be just as important to self-identify people that are interested in what you're doing and dissuade the people that aren't aren't your target market. It's just as important. So like for the employment side, he purposely said, if you're interested in this, you need to do X, Y, and he made these things like you have to go through this site and fill out all these forms. You have to go here and finish this. You have to do this. And the thing was, yeah, he was whittling it down, but you know what? He allowed them to self-whittle down. So he only got these really qualified people that were really interested in working, right? And the same thing works for a customer, right? Get rid of the ones that want the lowest hang. I don't want to pay a high price. I'm not interested in, doing this stuff. You find the ones that are actually really willing to, spend some money. Why not, right? And that way you're not servicing 8 million phone calls trying to figure out who's going to be a good customer and who's not. Let them whittle it through.
Yeah, and it's not one size fits all. So if someone drops you a message, fills out your form, whatever, and they say, I want to spend $1 million with you in the next 3 months, you pick up the phone. And if someone says, I got $100, you put them on an email sequence.
Right.
So the segmentation is very important because you can qualify the importance to you, the value to you of these people. And if you're clever about how you do it, you can get more information on them so you can deliver more relevant content to them.
Right. Yeah, and that's where it might take some time, but you can figure out what really matters, right? Is it, what are things that also might be indicators, like is it the number of years they've been in business? Is it their age? Is it their income levels? What are other things that I can ask that aren't necessarily intrusive that will help me realize this guy is really important, or this woman really, they represent a lot of money to me versus they don't, because not only is they're coming in, but as you're going out, which we talked about, use it both for that and for targeting, when you're doing your advertising. Hey, you know what? I'm going to spend money on these guys. They're worth it. Which we alluded to it, but we didn't state it very clearly. All your, the customers you want to keep, you should be having at least, I'd say, like 3 different levels of everyone gets this email, and then a certain group get an email and maybe a mailed physical card. And then some people after those, then we call them repeatedly. Right. And then there's some that you invite to fly them into town. Right. I mean, you do different levels depending on their value that they represent to you. And you know what? I just realized this is missing from this whole document is understanding lifetime customer value of a customer. Right. Mm-hmm. That's another one. I got to shove that back into the top because you shouldn't be looking at just this one little thing. It's, hey, maybe within a given year or even 3 years, how much money does this person represent for me? Not just this, they might buy one ticket item. It's the over time, over a set amount of time, how much do they truly represent? Because that can change everything and how you're looking at it.
A couple of other things to touch on. So as Joe says, you obviously in this kind of scenario, you may have an individual come to visit your website. You can supplement that information about that individual with other information. So you can understand it's a $1.2 billion company, right, or it's a mom and pop shop in Idaho, so you can contextualize the contact, which will help you understand how much value they are to you. And the other really important thing is that it's scalable. So it takes a little bit of time to think through the science and the psychology of the communication, but if you do it, particularly if you use an online technique, then you don't have to manage it per se. You focus your energy where it's the most value and the most reward, which is working on those high value prospects, not the low value ones that you either forget about or you put on a secondary campaign to move them further down the funnel and more likely to buy, or they buy online, not in person or whatever. So segmentation, augmenting or enriching the data, as it's called, very important, and it's scalable. These are all really good things about building out a strategy and a process like this.
Yeah, and to your point, separating, like a lot of people, salespeople I talk to, their companies don't provide any sort of resources and understanding of, doing any sort of like direct marketing or anything. They just say like, go figure it out. Companies really should say, look, we're going to have a system in place where, because salespeople on average, right, generally a lot of them are getting paid a decent amount of money. Maybe you should have an admin or someone else doing some of this, looking them up the companies, even if you can't automate it, right? Or if you haven't, we pay someone, or someone in the Philippines, get a virtual assistant, right? Spend $3 an hour to have someone go do some of this legwork for you. And they're doing it at the bigger scale to help you focus on really the more, the better high earning, type potential, and the things where your skills are really needed, right? That people to people contact.
Yeah, there's obviously an aspect of this which is not scalable, which is the human contact. But the idea is to have you only focused on the high value items, as Joe was saying. So the legwork, we would recommend probably that you either automate it or have a VA or a virtual assistant or someone in at a lower price point or in a lower cost market do some of that business intelligence gathering to let you then make an informed decision about how you act on the high value prospects.
Awesome. There are some other things in this list, and I'm trying to think of how we bring them up. There were a couple things of when you are creating your marketing materials, in there. Oh boy, actually, Laura Reese, she wrote 2 books. One's a visual hammer, and it's meant to be read at the same time as her other book, which is something I can't remember. But it has to do with the audio, like the sound of what you're doing. One's a visual, the other one is the sound of your what your thing stands for. But now I'm jumping around here because in Bill Bishop's stuff, he talks about having a visual that really catches the attention. And a couple examples he has in his books is this lady was a financial advisor, and so she would go to gift shows, not gift shows, what are they called? Not seminars, whatever.
Trade
conventions.
shows.
And she would be there and she'd be handing out these things with bubble wrap, and the people would take them and unwrap the bubble wrap, and in it was like a coin. And the people are like, why do you have a coin bubble wrapped? Like, is this special? She's like, well, your money, is very precious and safe. You need to keep it safe. That's what I do. I make sure your investments stay safe. And it got people to be like, wow, they actually remember, because she had a story tied to it. The visual thing, and then later they might see the bubble wrapped coin and they're like, oh, I remember talking to her. Yeah, this thing. So it was a great one of like having a visual thing. I actually thought of one, I shouldn't give it away, but I'm helping a guy that's a foundation work stuff. And I just kept noodling on it. Your subconscious is a wonderful thing, by the way. But I was like, okay, the foundation's really important. How do we do this stuff? And then I thought, it would be awesome. I think it'd be a hilarious thing for having on his business cards is to do a Photoshop of him standing next to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And he's going to be pushing it back up, right? Because I think the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it's one of the easiest things to say, look, your foundation is a critical thing. And yet it'll be a little funny, and I think people would remember it, right? And yet they'll get the whole concept that he's helping your, making sure your foundation stays good and solid. But yeah, I love that idea of having a visual one. And then the other one is, with audio is to use alliteration. So it is like Alan Alda, words that begin with the same letters or sounds, or things that rhyme. People love those kind of things.
There's all sorts of things. I think that a lot of the things that I think the more personal the communication is, the better. But now through technology, there's ways to deliver quite personal messages at scale. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So for example, particularly popular in the real estate sector is people send personalized, in inverted commas, postcards. So they are machine written, but look like they're by hand. And if you have data about that, you can contextualize it so it feels like that. I know a company who sent T-shirts to people with their own photo on it.
Videos too, right?
Yeah, videos. So there's now there's technology that lets you take a mailing list and insert people's names and things into images or videos. So all of this at the moment has a bit of a wow factor, or has more, to use a PR marketing term, it has more cut through. So it resonates more because it's a little bit different and not just your normal marketing message, marketing email. So if you can think of a way to differentiate yourself, not just with your product offering, but your marketing communication, then it starts to amplify and become even more powerful, because you have a unique and exciting offer presented in a unique and exciting way. You're more likely to turn heads and get people's interest, especially if it's, as we said in an earlier session, timely, relevant, and appropriate. If you can hit them at the right time in the right way with the right message, much of that is derived from the data or the knowledge that you gather from those people, then you're going to have a lot more success.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to find my examples because Bill Bishop has several books on this. Come up with a big idea. Figure out what your goal, not of yours, but of your client, your customers, right? What's their goal? Work through that. What's the problem they're having? And then name the problem they're having, and then, excuse me, come up with a solution to solve it and give it a name, right? So like earlier, I had one was the less is more is what I called it, problem, right? Everyone wants to grow their business. That's the goal. Yeah. But the problem is people think, I called it more is more. They think targeting more people gets to be more money. And then you come up with your big idea, your solution is, mine is the less is more, blah, blah, blah. And that's where by segmenting, by coming up with a position, right? But you give it a name. And when it's a name, people start relating to it, understand
totally
it.
Agree.
I think remember it.
It's almost for a topic for another session, but I absolutely agree with you. If you have a process or a procedure you follow, you should absolutely give it a name for a few reasons. It becomes immediately tangible, relatable. Yeah. You can assign perceived value to that. So rather than say, for example, I am a roofer and I fix roofs, then you should segment, you should lay out all of the steps of the process and demonstrate the value you give. So I have a pre-site inspection and it takes this long. I do these things. So this is an example of a way to sort of double back on something we talked about before, that you can differentiate or elevate yourself above the competition because you are more thorough. Now, it may be that you identify that you provide exactly the same service at exactly the same price, but the fact that you lay it out in simple terms, it's tangible, and people can see what they're getting for their money may well be enough to differentiate you from the competitor who just gives a price and people don't know what they're getting, because a lot of people want to know what they're getting for their money. And if you can show an established process, it's the Joe's 5-step painter's roof fixing system, and you know that there's steps and you can name it and it's tangible and it's a process you can repeat, it's often going to be scalable for you, so you can have another employee come in and do the same thing. And also, more importantly for the customer, it's very relatable. They can see what they're getting for the value. So you're unpacking something that you might otherwise say is $2,000 to do X. You unpack it to say, this is a 3-hour pre-whatever, then step. It's making it much more accessible and understandable and perceived hopefully to be more affordable and valuable.
Well, and that you're an expert too, right?
Right, that's very important, yeah.
I was going to give you another example I did for a friend of mine who's, all these guys are my quote unquote friends now, because that's just how I am, but he did my roof and we got to be good friends. And he wanted to do, his own business, and he's like, oh, I do roofing. I do, he actually did my radiant barrier in the attic. He does insulation and gutters. And then he also does like painting and fences and gates. And I said, let me give it some thought. And I came back to him. I said, look, these other things like the fences and gates, I said, and painting, it's interesting and it's great. But these other things like the roofing and what do you call them? Sunlights type thing, and insulation and radiant barrier. All of these things are all kind of, to me, in my head, they're all related. They're all very similar. I could see how one person could be an expert in these things. It's niched. And I said, let's not, you can still do them. If you're there on a job and people say they're looking for someone with a fence, you can do them. Just don't stress it. Don't put it in your marketing, right? Just say, like, I do these things too. Sure, great. Right. But I came up, I said, I gave it some thought, and I came up with the name of his company is Sealing Up, CEIL, but it's a double entendre, right? It's sealing up everything from here up because it is above the roof, and yet it's also sealing you're protecting, right? And I'm like, oh, I think it's a great, easy name. The other thing I wanted to add in there with everything you were saying about I love the whole coming up with your own terminology and words. It's really, really fascinating thing and I'm sure, Ryan, you do this a lot, the whole SEO battle in keyword search and stuffing and how hard it is and how much time you have to stay on top of it. If you're bold enough and come up with your own kind of terminology and words, and I think you also have to be doing some marketing, right, to drive it. If you're lucky enough and you differentiate yourself enough, your term can become a thing that people actually are looking for. And guess what? When they search for it, you're the only person that has it, right? So they come to you, and more importantly, over time, if it truly becomes like the thing, your competitors might even borrow it. But guess what? Because you started it, you were first, and it's embedded on your site, your competitors might mention it, but you still come up first. So
Yes.
it's a great way to differentiate yourself.
So you own it. Just a very quick another example. There's a photographer. This is a bit left field, but I think very relevant to this conversation. There's a photographer in the UK that takes product shots, and they have a brand they've developed called There's two brands they now have, but the first one they did was I Shoot Bottles. So shoot as in photos. I Shoot Bottles, and that's it. It's clear. You know exactly. Yeah. I've already told you what they do. You know what they do. They shoot bottles. And they've created a huge market awareness by being absolute clarity about what they do. Mm-hmm. They are seen to be one of the experts. They've just completely niched down. Photography is hugely competitive. They've just said very clearly, we shoot bottles. You know what they do. You already know. You've never seen their website. You know what it is.
Right.
And they get a lot of business through the clarity of their communication and their offering. And then obviously they do other products. When people come, they shoot other things. But if you want to shoot bottles, you know that they are one of the authorities. ishootbottles.com, very clear.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to your point, once you're in and you're a trusted thing for doing that, and he said, well, we can do other things as well, right? It's just it's getting that first connection to get a customer, to get them to trust to pay you for some money. Suddenly the world changes, right? And now it's so easy to go across on things. Again, you don't want to necessarily differentiate and say stress that you're doing it, but it's easy to do. Or if it becomes that busy, you create your own second business and say, this is our sister company. Right, and you have the same people feeding it.
Right. Yeah, you can have Chinese walls. You can do. They actually do that. They have another. I shoot something else.
Right.
I can't remember what it is, but yes, exactly. They have more than one, and one can be a lead gen for the other one. It's a nice little network they have built out there in the same way.
Awesome. Well, I hate to say it, I think I'm out of ideas.
All for another time.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Ryan. Thank you so much.
You're welcome
for taking the time.
An absolute pleasure.
All right, man. Take care.
Bye. Take care. Ciao.